Okay. Good morning. All right. Welcome back to the regular Sunday morning edition of the Daf Yomi. And we are going to start a little bit back from where we ended yesterday. We're going to start with Amar Rav, which is the middle of the page. Sorry?
Yesterday or Thursday?
Or I said Thursday, yeah, yesterday. Well, everybody who's on at the video just goes back to the last video. There's no time difference, right? So if you're going and you're like, well, wait a second, he already did that part. We'll do it again. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9 lines from the top. Amar Rava. Hashami Rabbanan lo nakriv. The Rabbanan, we were talking about mixing up animals that were invalid with animals that were valid and that we weren't going to bring them because they're all mixed up. And we said, Mida Oraisa, from a Torah perspective, they could be nullified, but from a rabbinic perspective, we were not going to let them be nullified. And now that we decided that they were, from a rabbinic perspective, not acceptable, if you brought it anyway, it wouldn't work. The Rabbanan have made it invalid to be brought as a korban. So, now the rabbis have said, don't bring it. If you do bring it, it doesn't count. It doesn't work. So that's interesting because from a Torah perspective, it's perfectly fine. Doesn't matter. Once the Rabbanan said it's no good, that makes it invalid. We discussed that potentially what mechanisms the Rabbanim have to be able to make it so that your animal is invalid. They might take it away from you out of your possession if you're not following. But Eisvei Rav Huna bar Yehuda l'Rava. Rav Huna bar Yehuda asks Rava the following question: Chatos shnis arva ba'ola, bird chatos. If I've got a bird chatos and a bird ola, and I mix the two birds up, the ola shnis arva b'chatos, and I take an ola and I mix up with a chatos, and I got two birds, I don't know what to do with them. Afilu achas beribo, even if I mix up 1 in 10,000 yamusu kulan, all of them are going to die, which is not like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah said they go out to the pasture, get a blemish, and then you can redeem them. You cannot redeem birds. So therefore, even if they get a blemish, you can't sell them ever. So these birds, once you've got a chatos mixed in with them, you're stuck. So all of them are supposed to die. You cannot use them at all. Bamedvar mamurin, when is that? Bekoin nimlach. That is only if the coin asks a rabbi, what are you supposed to do? He asks, what's the halacha by all these? And they say, don't use them. Lechatchila, don't use them, and therefore none of them are meratzeh. They're all out. Aval, however, bekoin she'ein nimlach, but let's say the coin didn't ask. He's like, yeah, I know what to do. And he goes and he offers them. Asan lemala, then he goes and he offers both birds above the red line. So then mechza kosher, mechza pasol. In that case, one of them was an ola, one of them was a chatos. The ola is fine. The chatas is not fine. Lamata, if he does them both below, mechza kosher, mechza pasol. The chatas is fine, the ola is no good. And then he just has to bring a replacement for the ola. So, achas lamata v'achas lamala, of course, if he brings one above, one below, then shnei and psulas, then both of them are going to be no good, because shani omer, chatas kreva lamala v'ola kreva lamata, we must presume that maybe he took the ola and brought it below the red line and the chatas above the red line, invalidating both. Or they could both be okay, but out of a suffix, we're going to be machmir and say no good. So therefore, what do we see? That if he had asked beforehand, the Rabbanan would have told him, can't bring it. But he didn't ask, and he brought it anyway. So now that he brought it, turns out it's kosher. Well, that's not what we said. So how are you going to explain this? Ella hakman damar balei chayim nidchin hakman damar. It's our old argument that we've had in the past. An animal that's alive, when it becomes invalidated, does it remain invalidated forever, or can it become revalidated? Right? As our rule is, once, generally speaking, let's say we had discussed in the past, we had this discussion in the past. Let's say I had a korban and I had shechted it. And now I've got the blood. And then the mizbeach gets destroyed, damaged, if you remember the machlokas. We had said once the korban is unable to be brought, even if they fix the mizbeach in the meantime, that korban is already invalidated, no good. The question that we had asked was, what if the animal had not been shechted yet? What if the animal was still alive? And then the mizbeach broke, and now the animal is unable to be brought, and then they fixed the mizbeach, and now it's okay again. Was the fact that there was a time that this animal was a korban, but wasn't able to be brought because there was no mizbeach, is that going to invalidate it? And we had that discussion back and forth. So that's really the same argument that we're seeing over here, right? The one who says that they are if these once this animal got mixed into the group, so then it's invalid. And then if you try to revalidate it later on, that's not going to work. But the other one says that if you did offer it, so then it was invalid for a time when it was all mixed together. But now that it's out of the mixture and it's going to be sprinkled to the mizbeach, it can be valid. So therefore, this is the argument, the old argument that we had about whether once it was at one point it was invalid, does it remain invalid as long as the invalidation was while the animal was still alive? Nobody disagrees that when the animal was already deceased, once the animal is already shechted, that it's invalid. Okay, so Hare shchutin de lekul yama nidchin. As we had stated, the ones that are slaughtered, everyone agrees, those are no good, right? Once I've got a slaughtered animal and it's mixed in together, so then now it's unable to be brought, so that's the end of that. Utnan. And we learn in a Mishnah later on. Rabbi Eliezer says, Im karav harosh shel echad mehen. If, Rabbi Eliezer says, let's say, you have one of the, even though this is the case, right, a korban that was mixed in together with a whole bunch of others. How are you? Welcome back. So if you take one of those, if you have, let's say, a whole bunch of animals that are all mixed together, and all of them are now shechted already, and the pieces are mixed up, we said everyone agrees that's no good, but here's a Mishnah. This Mishnah says that, let's say I had one of them, and I don't remember which is the one that has a mum on it. One of the animals has a blemish. I don't remember which one, but now I've got all these pieces of animals all sliced up, ready to be burned on the mizbeach, and they're all mixed up. So I took one of the heads and I brought it onto the mizbeach and I burned it. So says Rabbi Eliezer, once you've done that to one of them, you can presume you brought the one that was bad already. Now you can bring all the rest. All the rest are fine to bring. So therefore, if everyone agrees that if for a time the animals that were already shechted are completely invalidated, so then why, if they're invalidated, so then why is he suggesting that once you've burned the first one, now you can burn all the rest? It was invalid because you had it mixed up. Now you're fixing it. So who is that? So the answer is Huda Amar Kechanan HaMitzri. He's a distinct character. He holds like Chanan HaMitzri. This Mishnah, this Rabbi Eliezer, he holds like Chanan HaMitzri. And that is the Tanya we learn in a Brisa. Here's what Chanan HaMitzri says. Chanan the Egyptian. Omer afilu dam bekos mevi chaveru mazaveglo. If you have on the Yom Kippur service, part of the service was they would take two matching goats. And they would have the lottery, right? One was La Hashem, one was La Azazel. The one that was La Hashem was going to be a sacrifice. One that was La Azazel was going to get pushed off the cliff later on in the service. So the one that was La Hashem, we had described its service, right? They shechted it, they caught the blood, they brought it into the Beis HaMikdash, they sprinkled it one time up, 7 times down in the Holy of Holies. They went into the holy area, one time, 7 times down, and then they brought to the Mizbeach, and they applied it to the Mizbeach, the inside Mizbeach. Okay, and then they poured the Shirayim into the base. We know all those rules and details. Let's say you have the blood of this goat and you're ready to do all your applications, and the goat for Azazel dies. It's had enough. That's the end. Today is its last day, and that's it. It dies. You need to have the other goat in order for they have to be a pair, right? So therefore, if you have no goat for Azazel, the blood from the goat that you have currently is invalid. Says most opinions, you got to start over, right? Now you've got to bring 2 new goats because you need a new Azazel. In order to have a new Azazel, you've got to have a new korban. So now you got to bring 2 new goats, start again. Says Chanan HaMitzri, not so. You don't say here I've got this blood in the cup. It's nidche, meaning at this point I can't sprinkle this blood. Why? Because I've got no Azazel. With no Azazel, this blood is invalid to be sprinkled. So everybody else says, I got to get rid of it. I got to start over. Says Chanan HaMitzri, no. All I got to do is find one more goat, designated as La Azazel, and that revalidates the blood that's in my hand, because now the blood that's in my hand has another goat. That's fine. So but for a moment, it wasn't valid. So if you have the principle of Hol v'nidcha yidcha, once something was invalid, it can't become revalidated. So how does this blood become revalidated? Chanan HaMitzri says, even something that's shechted can become revalidated again. So therefore, generally speaking, we have an argument whether something that's alive can be pushed off as a sacrifice and then revalidated. And therefore, that's an argument between our Mishnah and this brisa that we had of the birds. Our Mishnah says, when it was mixed together, it's invalid, it can never be brought again. So the brisa of the birds was You mix it up, it can be validated again. That's according to the opinion that says live things can become revalidated. And everybody else agrees that once it's shechted, it can't be revalidated. But then Rabbi Eliezer comes along and says it can be. That's because Rabbi Eliezer holds like Chanan HaMitzri, who is an individual opinion who holds that even once something has been shechted, it can become revalidated.
That one's interesting because they're supposed to be like twins.
That's right. Yes. So that's it. Chanan HaMitzri goes that far as to say that you can just bring another one. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avuha, Amar Rav. Now, this comes where it gets very interesting. And these are, again, the logic here is we can't think of, I always think of bittul as sort of like, what are the chances, like probability. That's not a good way to think about it. You have to think about it from a perspective that, from the Torah's perspective, once something is in a majority, it's nullified. All of the rules about why it's not nullified are rabbinic. And therefore, when the rabbis say something is not nullified, we say because it's severity, because it's a situation, we're not going to nullify it. So we have to think from that perspective as we read the next section of Gemara. Rav Nachman says in the name of Rabba bar Avuha, okay? Amar Rav in the name of Rav. Tabah shel avodas kochavim. You've got a ring. This ring was used to serve idolatry. I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, like they got the ring of power, and you got this ring, and it was used to decorate avodah. It wasn't served itself, right? That's important because then that becomes zivchim, it becomes prohibited in a whole different way. This ring was used. They, adorned, they decorated, Avodah Zarah was there, they put the ring in front of it. Okay, now you've got this ring, and somebody took it away, and it was never nullified. Remember that we said in Avodah Zarah, a non-Jew can nullify, an idolater could nullify the ring, and then it could be usable again. But nobody nullified it. So now, Shenis Arva b'mea tabos, it now gets mixed up with 100 other perfectly valid, fine rings in the jewelry store. V'nafla achas mehen layam hagadol. And then, the guy, the jeweler, is walking around, he's got 101 rings, he drops one, all identical, drops one into the water, and it's gone. Hutru kulon, all of them are now valid. Why? The one that fell, that's the prohibited one. Right? Now, as I said, don't think of it from a perspective of what are the chances. There is no chances there. Just the Rabbanan are saying, since we're being strict, once there's a reason to say it's not prohibited anymore, we will be okay with it. Okay, now this is the opinion of Rav Nachman, who said it in the name of Rabbi Avuha, in the name of Rav. Eisvei Rava l'Rav Nachman. So Rava says to Rav Nachman, 1 second, our Mishnah says not like that. Afilu achas beribo yamusu. That if you mix up the bunch, right, you mix up the one kosher, the one invalid animal with all the valid animals, they all have to die. So yamusu kulan, all of them. Amai, why should that be? Nema demis, let one of them die, and Isura Mis, and then we say the one that was prohibited died, following the same rules that you just applied to this ring. The first one that dies, we can presume, that's the one that died, and that's it. Amarle said back to him, Rav de Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rav is of the opinion that he follows Rabbi Eliezer Shita. Detnan, as we learned in a Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer holds. Im karav harosh shel echad mehen, yikravu kol harosh in kulon. He learns this Mishnah that we had just learned in a moment ago. If I have all of these pieces of korbanos mixed together, one of them is an invalid sacrifice, all of them otherwise are perfectly valid, and I mix them all together, and then accidentally one of the Kohanim didn't get the memo, and he does not realize that all of them are invalid. So he takes one of the heads and he brings it on the Mizbeach. Now, can you bring the rest? Says Rabbi Eliezer, yes, you can. Why? Because we presume the first one you brought was the invalid one. So that's only Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. So Rav holds with Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. That's why he says if you drop one ring, you drop them all. The Mishnah doesn't agree with Rabbi Eliezer. The Mishnah says they're all no good. So therefore, it's a difference of perspective. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, but doesn't Rabbi Eliezer say lo hitir Rabbi Eliezer? I'm sorry, Amar Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer says lo hitir Rabbi Eliezer. Doesn't Rabbi Eliezer hold el shnayim aval echad echad lo? When you bring these animals onto the mizbeach, you have to bring them two at a time. Now, why is that? Because when you bring them two at a time, you say, you know that only one animal was no good. So if I bring two animals at a time, so then one of them for sure is good. So therefore, as I bring the first one, I say, well, this one, it can't be, if they both can't be prohibited. Therefore, this one is probably fine, that one is probably fine, because if it's one, it can't be both. So therefore, I'm definitely bringing one that's fine. So that's doubt number one. And then I have a second doubt, which is that it might have been the one that was burnt all the way at the beginning anyway. So therefore, since I create this sort of situation, this artificial double doubt that I'm creating, that's why I can rely on it and be okay with it. So therefore, how can this one ring fall into the water and I be fine? You need to have two. You need the second doubt that you have to introduce. So Amar Lei, so he says, Ananami tarti kamina. He says, yeah, I'm also saying you need two. You're right. When this guy sells the rings, he's got to sell them in pairs, so that he's using them in pairs. Okay, so that's the solution. Amar Rav says, Tabasha avodos kochavim. Let's say here's the statement that Rav made. If I've got a ring that was used to decorate idolatry, shenis arba b'mea tabaos, and it was mixed together with 100 rings. Now, uparshu arbaim l'makom echad. 40 of them are over here. V'shishim l'makom acher. 60 of them are over here. Okay. So now, parsha achas me'arbaim. If one of the 40 gets separated from the 40, eina osaris, and it gets mixed in with a bunch of permitted rings, that's fine. Why? I've got my double doubt. It's probably in the 60, not in the 40, right? Probability-wise, the prohibited ring is probably in the 60, not in the 40. Therefore, it's unlikely that I have the prohibited ring in the first place. And then even if it was the prohibited ring, it got mixed in with another set of rings, and therefore it's permissible. Achas mishishim, but... Oh, okay, thank you. You're seeing I'm doing math. He's ready with the math board. So, achas mishishim oseres. However, if you take one from the 60 and I mix it with other rings, that's going to be prohibited. Why? Maishna achas me arba'im delo amrina nisur beruba isay. So he says when it comes from the 40, we say that it didn't come from the majority, where the prohibited ring probably is. So therefore, we have like a double doubt situation. It's probably not in the 40, and even if it is, then it's mixed in with these other rings. Achas mishishim. So when are the 60? Nami amrina nisur beruba. You say once you take the one out of the 60, you say, well, the other 59 is probably where the prohibited ring is. So why is it that if I take one out of the 60 and I mix it with the other rings, that's no good? So rather, Ella, what we say is like this. You're right. That would, in fact, be a good point, right? If I had 60 and I took one of the 60 and I mixed it with the other rings, the prohibition is probably within the other 59. This ring is probably prohibited in the first place. And even if it is, it's mixed with the other rings. That would be permitted. So really, this is what it means. In parshu arbaim, okay? Now Yehuda likes the drawing, so therefore we're going to go with it. Right?
For me, it's for everyone else.
For everyone besides Yehuda. Okay? I've got my 40 rings, I got my 60 rings, okay? And now I've got my permitted rings over here. If all 40 fall in, okay, so then parshu arbaim l'makom echad v'shishim l'makom acher, right? So 40 or 60 are separated. So then, I went back. Parshu arbaim kulan l'makom echad. All 40 went to one place. Ein osros. Then they're not going to prohibit this group. Why? Because the ring is probably not in the 40, and then it's mixed together. It might not even be one of those rings in the first place. However, if the 60 falls in here, then shishim l'makom echad osros. Then it's going to be prohibited, because we have to say it's probably in the 60. And therefore, we only have a doubt whether it's one of the new ones or not. So that was what he said. So therefore, if all 60 fall into the permitted ones, that's where it's not going to work. When they said this teaching in front of Shmuel, Amar lei, Hanach le'avodos kechavim shesveika v'safek sveika asura ad sof ha'olam. Rabbi Shmuel says, the only thing is, I disagree, because when it comes to idolatry, even a situation, the double doubt situation that we're creating, still prohibited when it comes to idolatry. Idolatry is a more severe prohibition than other prohibitions. So therefore, even if I have, let's say, a prohibited piece of nevela meat or something like that, so then, yes, I could rely on the doubt and then a secondary doubt in order to permit the group. But when it comes to avodah zarah, it's more severe, and I can't. That's what he says. Now, that means that we have to have somebody who holds this. Shmuel is offering up something new here. He's saying that even though we have rules of nullification, and we have a concept of safek sveika, a double doubt, and double doubts, once I get a double doubt, something becomes permissible. When it comes to avodah zarah, when it comes to idolatry, we're going to be strict in that case too. So where do we see that? So Meisvei, so we ask the following question. Safek avodas kochavim asura. Here it says that if I have a doubtful situation of idolatry, then it's prohibited. The safek sveika muteris, but a double doubt is permitted. Okay, so that's not going to be Shmuel. Ketzad, how does this work? Kos shel avodas kochavim. If I've got a cup that was used for idolatry idolatrous purposes. Shenafal le'otzer molei kosos, falls into a whole storage area where there's tons of cups, right? All of them are mixed together. Kulan asurin, all of them become prohibited. Pirish echad mehan, one of those cups now gets separated, leribo, and it gets mixed in with another 10,000. There are disagreements about whether we read this section or not. We could say, I'll say it, but we're just pointing out that we may not even need it because already we're in a double doubt situation because the first cup got mixed in with one group and then one of that group got mixed into the second group. That's already what we call the double doubt. It should be permissible. Omei riboy leribo, if I mix it then from that group into another group, mutarin, they are permissible, right? Because that's a double doubt and it's permissible. So how can Shmuel say that when it comes to Avodah Zarah, we're strict? Here it's clear that they're not. So tonight, the answer is it's a machlokas, right? Rabbi Shmuel, that Shmuel is holding like the other side. How do we see the machlokas? Titania, we learn in a brisa. Rabbi Yehuda says, Rimoni Badon, the famous pomegranates of Badon. The pomegranates of Badon, we said, were so significant and important, but they don't become nullified. Right? Remember, we had the list of 6 things that were nullified. The pomegranates of Badon. Osra and a bit kol shehu. They prohibit if you mix them with any amount of any amount to anything else, right? Everything else, if I have a prohibited orla piece of fruit, right? It's mixed 1 to 200, it's nullified, right? But when it comes to these pomegranates of Badon, not so. Ketzad, how does that work? Nafal echad mehen l'tok ribo. If I have one pomegranate Badon that falls into 10,000, umei ribo leribo, and then I have a pomegranate, then from that group falls in another one, 10,000 to 10,000, right? I've got one pomegranate. It falls into 10,000. And then one of them falls into another 10,000. So now I've got my double doubt. Nevertheless, asurin, they're prohibited, according to Rabbi Yehuda. All 20,000 are now all prohibited. 21,000. 20,001. 20,001 are all prohibited, right? Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon says, Mishum and Rabbi Shimon, Leribo osrin, into this 10,000 they're prohibited. Umei ribo lishlosha, but even if one of them comes out of this and mixes into 3, then umishlosha makamachar mutter, they're permitted. Right? Once you separate that out, you've got why? Because this is a doubt, suffix. If this now comes out into a group of even 3, we don't know, of course, which one is the blue one, right? Now it's permitted. Once I take one of these, it's permitted.
And if you have a sticker on it, if you have a sticker on it, then you could probably...
Then you're good, right? Then I don't have a mixture, then I'm okay.
What's the difference between this one going to 2 groups of 10,000 as opposed to going to one group of 30,000?
It wouldn't make a difference. Because in the end, right, the rabbis are using this 10,000, like I think it was Moshe said. Was that like the rabbi's way of saying 1 in a million? The answer is yes, right? When they say it's not nullified, the number is insignificant. It's never nullified. However, what is significant is the number of times it gets remixed, which is interesting, right? If I had 20,000 all at once, it wouldn't be nullified. But if I go to 10,000 and then one of those comes and goes into another 10,000, now, according to this even, 10,000 and then into 3, it's nullified. Right? Because
specifically
going into one group and then from that group to another group, because it creates a halachic status of called suffix feka, a double doubt. This is doubt number 1. In any amount, it's not going to be valid. But once we get from there into doubt number level 2, then it's a derivative doubt, and now it's permissible.
So that's the machlokas.
That's the machlokas. So therefore, we see that disagreement.
So according to one opinion, you have an easy way to be machshir the 10,000, and according to the other, you can't.
Well, this 10,000 is going to be prohibited anyway. It's this one that's going to be okay.
So that mixture of 3 will be okay.
Correct. But these 10,000 are no good.
Yeah, I thought you said with the rings.
Yes, with the rings.
You could assume that the one that fell in.
Oh, so that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. We have to remember all the different shitos here, right? Rabbi Eliezer is the one who holds. Once one falls in, then we can presume the one that was prohibited fell in, right? Question is whether Rabbi Eliezer would hold that way when it comes to a rimone badon, right? Because that was one item that was choshev and maybe it never gets nullified. But no, because avodah zarah is not nullified. It wouldn't make a difference. He would agree. But that's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Now we've got Rav and Rav seems to agree with that position. Shmuel says no when it comes to avodah zarah, and then Rav said a separate thing, which is that even if one doesn't fall in, I could nullify it in a double doubt. To which Shmuel says you can't nullify avodah zarah in a double doubt. And then we brought up position that says you can nullify avodah zarah with double doubt. Now he says it's an argument, so now we're showing this rimone badon that it gets nullified in a double doubt. The only thing is, what kind of prohibition is this pomegranate? It's not an idolatrous prohibition. This Mishnah is talking about a case of, let's say, for example, probably truma or orla with a fruit, right? So therefore, the issue here is, let's see, it's orla. Yeah, orla or truma, right? Orla or truma is the prohibition here. So therefore, according to Shimon, it should be nullified. So that's going to be our problem, okay? So Ika Rabbi Shimon. So if it's Rabbi Shimon, afilu bavodos kochavim nami shari. So 1 second. So now, I'm sorry. Shmuel de Amar Kaman. The question is Shmuel. Who does Shmuel hold like now? Shmuel said that when it comes to avodah zarah, you can't do a double doubt. When it comes to other prohibitions, you can do a double doubt. Ika Rabbi Yehuda, if he's holding Rabbi Yehuda, so afilu b'shar asur moser. Rabbi Yehuda says double doubt is always prohibited. Rabbi Yehuda, this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, 10,000 to 10,000, it's no good. But Shimon only said that when it comes to idolatry. Ika Rabbi Shimon, if he's holding Rabbi Shimon, afilu b'avodas kachavim nami shari. Rabbi Shimon seems to hold, that even when it comes to idolatry, it's permitted. Because he talks about orla here, but we have no reason to presume that he holds differently when it comes to idolatry. Maybe Rabbi Shimon here does say that when it comes to orla, it's permitted. But if this same case would happen, and this was a ring, and it was prohibited because of idolatry, that would be still prohibited. But that's not true, because here we learn in a brisa. Safek avodos kochavim asura v'safek sfeik asura. We had this statement, this brisa we said before, that when it comes to idolatry, the original prohibition, if it gets mixed into a mixture, it's prohibited. If something from that mixture gets into a second mixture, it's permitted. Now, who is that? Money. Lo Rabbi Yehuda v'lo Rabbi Shimon. Then it's not going to be Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, because Rabbi Yehuda says double doubts are always prohibited, and it can't be Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon says double doubts are permitted. But if you're telling me that he agrees that when it comes to idolatry it's prohibited, then nobody holds it's permitted by idolatry. So who would this be? We need to have somebody who holds that when it comes to idolatry it's permitted. So Liolam, Rabbi Shimon, Ushmuel Savarlik Rabbi Yehuda Bechado, Polygar Ale Bechado. The answer is Shmuel thinks that Rabbi Yehuda is right. It's a machlok, you're right. Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon disagree across the board whether a double doubt works or not. But Shmuel says, I agree with Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to other prohibitions, when it comes to avodah zarah, that we're going to be strict and double doubt does not work. But when it comes to other prohibitions, we're going to be able to be lenient and say a double doubt does work because of the severity of the prohibition of idolatry. Amar Mar. So now, going back to this point, right, we had the case of 10,000 and then 10,000 to 3. Now, this I should have drawn it like this, right? 10,000 to 3. So I had 3 here, and then we're presuming that what it means is 3 and then 1 gets mixed in. Okay, so that, when I take one of these away from there, that one's going to be permitted because it's nullified in the majority. Now, the question is, if I says, I'm going to say Amar Mar, we said, Meribo lishlosha, right? I'm sorry, you're going to get, this item is going to get mixed in with 10,000, and then one of these 10,000 is going to mix in with 3. One of these 3 then gets separated from the group. It is mutter, it's permitted. Why? So the question we're going to ask is, on Ayin Dalmad base, the one that gets separated is permitted, and then each one as it gets separated is now permitted, so all 3 are going to be permitted. Okay? So Maishna Shlosha. So why 3? Dikaruba, because it's a majority. Well then, Shnaim Nami Ikaruba. All I need is 2. I don't need 3. I'd have a 2 to 1. I'd have a majority. It would also be nullified. So my Gimel Dikatani, when the Mishnah says Gimel, what does it mean? The Brisa, it says Tarti Vehu. It means 3, including it, as I drew it in the first place, right? That's the 3. The 3 is 2 plus the 1, so therefore it is, right? V'boy same, or the other way to look at it is Savar Lok Rabbi Eliezer. He is holding like Rabbi Eliezer, who disagrees in Avodah Zarah. And what happens is that in that Masechta in Avodah Zarah, there's this is a separate thing completely, right? So now, back to the beginning. We're going to go back to explain why Shmuel, so that's the end of that. Next point is, another explanation of why Shmuel holds that we have to be stricter when it comes to idolatry than other averos, is because he agrees with Rabbi Eliezer's shita. And here's what happened in Maseches Avodah Zarah, recap of Maseches Avodah Zarah, right? If I have a clay oven, so they're very brittle and they fall apart until you heat them up. Once they're heated up, then they become solid. So what you have to do is you have to fire the oven, right? So you put wood in there and get it heated up. What if you use branches that were part of an Asherah tree in order to heat it up? Well, now the oven becomes usable, but it becomes usable because of idolatry. As a result of that, you can't benefit from this oven. You've got to smash the oven, rebuild it. Can't use it.
Everything you cook in there is not kosher.
That's correct. Everything you cook in there, I say it's not kosher. It's kosher, but prohibited, right? You can have kosher things that are prohibited.
Because the oven was established
As using avodah zarah, correct. However, let's say I had a perfectly valid oven. It was already fired and used by perfectly valid reason, in a perfectly valid way. And then I heat it up again. But this time I use idolatrous wood in order to heat it up.
Not good.
So now that oven is no good as long as it's still hot. But I have to wait until it cools off. Once I wait for the cool off, the avodah zarah is gone, right? Any benefit is gone, and it's okay, and I can use it again. So let's say I bake bread, or I use bread in there, right? So now I've got idolatrous heated up wood, and so now I baked bread in there. The bread is prohibited. Let's say that bread then gets mixed in with other bread. So now we've got an argument. So Rabbi Eliezer says that you can permit this mixture. This mixture is now. If that something comes from that mixture mixes into those bread are prohibited. If that becomes mixed into something else, that's prohibited. If it becomes secondarily mixed into something else, that's permitted. To which Rabbi Eliezer says no. Until you take a piece of money, the value of the wood that you used, and throw it away, indicating that you're not getting any benefit from the avodah zarah, then you can't use the bread even if it mixes into another mixture.
Hold on, but you said that normally you have to destroy the whole oven, so shouldn't the money you throw away be equivalent to the value?
Only if that was the first firing of the oven, right? Because then you've made the oven valid. If we're talking about an oven that is already fine, so it's only the value of the wood that you use to make this bread that you have to throw away. But you're right. If I used the oven, well, I really have to break the oven. There's no fixing it under that circumstance. Once I fired up the oven, that oven really shouldn't be used. I shouldn't be using it and then throwing the money away, right? So now that means that Rabbi Eliezer is the opinion that holds that you can't mix and then mix again. So Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Eliezer. That's the second potential answer that we have. Okay. Amar Reish Lakish is Chavis Shel Truma Shenis Arba B'Meya Chavios. I've got a barrel, a whole barrel. A sealed barrel is one of those items that are not nullified. One of on our list. Sealed barrels are important and they cannot be nullified. If I have a barrel that has truma in it, and I mix that barrel up with a whole bunch of other barrels that are, I guess, similar product, so therefore I can't tell which one is which, right? Now, I've got a mixed up bunch of barrels. One of those barrels falls into the Dead Sea. Okay? Unusable. Hutru kulon. All of them are now fine. Why? Damrinon, hachdinafal, di'isura nafal. That one that fell in was the prohibited one, similar to what Rav said before about the rings. Now, why do I have to say this again? Why does Reish Lakish have to say this? Rav Nachman said it already. So v'itzichter Rav Nachman, v'itzichter Reish Lakish. Both cases are important to note, even though they have the same halacha. Why? Dimi Rav Nachman, if I had heard Rav Nachman say it about the rings, right? It might be that it's when it comes to idolatry, because idolatry is such a significant prohibition, one of them's got to fall into the water because I cannot. It's lenient because you cannot nullify idolatry. Once a Jew owns idolatry, right? I can't nullify it. And so therefore, since it's going to be expensive, this is an expensive problem, the Rabbanan said, okay, we can be lenient and let us presume the one ring that fell in was the idolatrous ring. Okay, because it's going to cost a lot of money otherwise. About truma, but when it comes to truma, not so. There's a way to solve the problem. Sell the whole stuff to the Kohen. Right? If every Kohen buys the whole bunch, so I guess you're going to lose some money because when you sell truma, it's worth less because you have supply and demand issues, right? Since a Kohen's the only customers are Kohanim, you have fewer customers, so therefore you're going to sell it for cheaper. But nevertheless, you don't lose all the money. So I might think, no, I couldn't rely on that. So ve'i mid Reish Lakish, if he told me Reish Lakish, have min chavis de minker nefilta. I might have thought, you know why you can rely on it when it comes to the truma? Because a barrel falling into the water is a huge thing. Everybody notices that. It makes a big splash, everybody sees it, and you go, oh, I see why all the rest of the barrels are fine, because one of the barrels fell in. Aval tabas, but the jeweler, he's walking along, one ring falls into the water. Everybody knows there's a mixed up rings. Nobody notices the one ring that fell. So delo min kira nifilasa, nobody would notice. Lo, I would say no. So therefore tzrichi. So I have both cases. But tell me in either circumstance, the law is the same. One falls in, I can presume it's the prohibited one. Amar Rabba says, Lo hit Rish Lakish elechavis de min kira nifilasa. Rish Lakish, though, himself holds that only with that the case is only true with the barrel, right? Because you can recognize when it fell in. Aval te'ena low. But if a fig fell in, let's say you had a mixture of figs, whatever, if a fig fell in, that wouldn't be significant, and he wouldn't allow it. For Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yosef says, no, afilu te'ena kinefila sa, kach liyasa. Rav Yosef says, no, I don't agree with you. Reish Lakish would hold the same thing is true by a fig. He says, because whatever it is, however the amount that prohibits, that's the amount that you need to require to have drop into the water in order to permit it.
What if you bring a witness or a few witnesses?
Yeah, you'd be able to make sure that people like hold up signs or whatever in order to prove that it happened, right? That might help you, but the point is you don't even need that. Right? You don't even need it. Right? Significant. It's acceptable in the way that it is.
If I said, but doesn't it say that if it's not noticeable?
That was what we presumed, right? But then Reish Lakish seems to imply. Then Rabbi Yosef says, nah, that's not necessary. Now the question you're asking is according to the opinion that says it does have to be recognizable. Yeah. Can you make a big fuss, blow a trumpet, and say, "Hey, everybody, I want to make a public announcement. A ring just fell in." That's a good question, right? Is that enough?
Can we talk about 1 second why 1 out of 100 is okay again?
Rabbinic, right? Because again,
like we were saying, it's not a probability.
Because from the Torah's perspective, they're all fine. The rabbi said, don't use these rings because we've got a strict prohibition here. We've got truma mixed in here. So then the rabbi said, okay, but you're going to lose a lot of money. Or if people are going to recognize that we don't want people to make a mistake and presume that this guy's eating something that's mixed in. The fact that one of them fell in is going to be okay to permit it, so we want the rabbis to say, we just want people to notice that.
Because the rice, that's okay.
Correct, the rice, it's okay. That's the key critical part of all of this. The rabbis are just saying, when are we going to be strict? We just want to be a little strict. Not really, really strict. We don't want people to lose a ton of money, and we don't want people to presume everything's okay. So we want to see a little bit of recognition here, right? Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Chavish shel truma. If I've got a barrel of truma, shenafla bekuf chavios, that falls into 100 barrels. Now the rule of truma is it's batal b'meya. It's nullified in 1 to 100 ratio.
That one's deraisa?
That is derabanan also. And all these things are going to be all these.
Is simple majority?
Simple majority. That is correct. And I had not realized that until I read this Gemara, because we see all these majority cases. I would presume truma is 1 to 100. We see that the nullification volume 1 to 60 when it comes to tastes and things. Also when it comes to 1 to 200 by Orla, these apparently are all rabbinic amounts. But simple rove would be sufficient, which means that if you have doubtful situations, there's room to be lenient in a lot of these cases, right? Poseach achas mehen. So here's what you do, right? You have 100, so open one of them. So now, if you have it sealed, they're never nullified because it's chashuv. But if it's open, it's 1 to 100 ratio, you're fine. So just open it. Right? V'notel heimena kedei dimua v'shosa. Right? So then, what you got to do is take out the amount, right, of the mix of the doubtful truma, so that way you're not benefiting from the mixture, right? And then you're okay, right? The one you take the 100, but once it's open, now it's acceptable and you're good. Yosef Rav Dimi v'kamar leila hashmaisa. So Rav Dimi was sitting and he was teaching over this teaching of Rabbi Elazar. And he was saying it in front of Rav Nachman. Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said, "Gama v'shasi chazina hacha." He says, "I see there is a permissible here to swallow up and drink everything here." Right? You never have a circumstance. This whole concept of a sealed barrel being choshev and not being nullified is now ruined because all you got to do is open the barrel. When do you ever have anything significant then that's not nullified? All you got to do is open it. Ella, so he says you got to teach it like this. Niftecha achas mehen notel hamina kedimu v'shosa. It cannot be actively opened. It is just okay if it was opened. Meaning you can't actively nullify it. Right? If it happened to get opened, then you're right. Then you can solve this problem. But if you are sitting here with 100 barrels, you can't open it in order to nullify it. That's Rav Nachman's point.
Can you passively leave it so that you know someone else is going to come and open stuff later?
That's a good question, right? How protective do you have to be? I would presume that the answer is yeah. You could allow it to become in a situation where it opens, right? But I don't have to protect it from being opened, but I cannot open it. Right? These are all great kashrus questions. This is where kashrus questions get asked, right? If I've got circumstances where a small amount of some non-kosher product gets mixed in together with other kosher product in the making of that product, can I nullify it? And usually the answer is not if I'm doing it intentionally. If I'm doing an intentional nullification, it becomes problematic, even if the prohibited item is in very small quantities. Amar Rabbi Shaya says, Chavish shel truma. Now I've got a barrel of truma, shenis arva b'meya v'chamishim chavios, and it gets mixed in with 150. V'niftechu meya mehen. 100 of them get opened. Okay, so now I'm good. With 100, it's nullified. Nota hamena kidei dimua. I got to take the amount of truma out of the 100 barrels. V'shosa, and I could drink the others. However, v'shar asurim, the other 50 are still prohibited, because they're closed, they're not nullified. So I've got the 100 are open, the 100 are fine, but the other, you can't presume that the prohibited was in the 100, so therefore now the 50 are okay, right? I opened, even though that was the majority, right? I had 150, 100 of them are now opened, 100 of them are fine, 50 are still prohibited. Ad sheyiftechu, until they get opened. Okay? Lo amrinan isur beruba iseh. We don't say that since 100 got opened, probably the prohibited one got taken care of. We have to leave the 50 as unacceptable regardless.
What's the difference between the cases we just went over that I missed? Like
where one ring falls in, where one thing
falls in.
Yes,
it's the prohibited one.
I'm going to presume that we have two different opinions here. Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, who's going to allow us to presume the first one that's opened is prohibited, and other opinions, right, who don't hold that way. It seems also, well, this is also, it is, Rav Nachman is agreeing to that. I'm going to double check on that. I believe the answer is that it's that we're cholik on that position, that you can rely on the first one that was opened. Because otherwise, you're right. Once the first one opens, just presume that one's the one that's prohibited. Go ahead and open all the rest. Okay. Haroveya vehanirva. Okay. The next case was we had an animal that was engaged in relations with a person mixed together with all the other animals. So the halacha is that we had a whole list of these animals that you could not, since they could not be brought as sacrifices, ones that were set aside for idolatrous, ones that were worshipped of idolatrous purposes, one that was used as a prostitute's wages, one that was used in exchange to purchase a dog, ones that were treifa, all this list. Okay, and if they mix together, so then we have to wait till they get a blemish. We have to then sell it, use the money that we then purchase in order to buy new sacrifices. So bishlam akulahu lo yadia. I understand. Look at all of the list. There's no visible external way of knowing whether this animal is prohibited or not. Ella hai treifa hechidami. But how do you have an animal that's treifa and not know it? It had to get injured. So isn't its injury visible? So how could you not, once it's mixed together with the animals, know the one that was injured is the one that's prohibited? That's the treifa. So iya diale leisivilish, and if you know which one it is, just go take it out. Idalo yadale mino yada diariv. So also there's a possibility that it could be treifa and you never knew about it, right? It had an internal injury. But if that's the case, then how did you even presume there was a mixture of a treifa in this herd in the first place? I had to have an animal that I knew was a treifa somehow, and then it got mixed. So either it has an external thing to happen to it, therefore I know, or it has, like if it just has some sort of problem with its lungs and I don't know anything about it, so of course then there's no reason to prohibit anything. So Amri de Rabbi Yanai, so they learned in Yeshiva Rabbi Yanai, what are we dealing with here? Kagon di Arev, Nikuvas Hakots Bedrusas Hazev. What happens is we've got all these animals have puncture wounds. Almost all of them have a puncture wound from a regular thorn. That's non-fatal. The other one's got a wound from a wolf attack. That's fatal because it gets infected. And so therefore, since that's the one that's treifa, we don't know by looking at them externally because they all have puncture wounds, but one of them is the treifa. We once knew, but now we don't. Reish Lakish says, Kagon di arev benefula. What happens is the animal fell. I knew that it fell. It has internal injuries. I knew that it fell, so therefore there's no way for me to know which animal fell once it gets mixed in with the herd. Because they all look identical. But I know I've got a treifa in there.
Until you shave the hair off it and then see what...
Until you shecht it.
Yeah.
You got to shecht it and then you would know, right?
When it comes to all these cases, there's a risk that, okay, you've thrown away one to compensate for the one brought in there. But what happens when you bring the animal to the mizbeach and, I don't know the name of the guy.
In all of these cases, you're not bringing them at all, right? You're going to leave them all to get a blemish. And then you're selling them. None of them are going to be brought. That's exactly the problem. You're never going to bring these animals, right? You're trying to avoid bringing these animals.
Even after you remove one.
Correct. It's not going to help you, right? They're all not nullified. So nefula nami libad ka. You could still check to see which one fell, know which one's injured. So kasavar, he holds amda tricha meis laes. So halcha tricha bedika. So the answer is he holds that if the animal gets up, right, if it falls, if it gets back up, you have to wait 24 hours to see if once it's 24 hours survives the fall, in the last 24 hours, it must not be a treifa. Or if it starts walking around, so if it starts walking around immediately, when you shecht it, you still have to check it. So therefore, this animal could be walking around, and it could be a treifa. So that's my concern. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, "Kigon de orev bevlad treifa." It's not an animal treifa in the first place. What's happened here is that I had an animal was a treifa. It gave birth to another animal. That animal has the same din as the mother. It's nullified, can't be brought as a korban because its mother was a treifa. Therefore, the animal's perfectly healthy. It looks like all the other animals, but I know that one of these animals was born to a mother that was a treifa, and now it got mixed in.
Has there been a time where there was an animal that was born with 3 legs? What do you do then?
Then samum. Then I can't bring it at all, right? The Rabbi Eliezer, it's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. The Amar is he has Vlad Treifa lo yikrav legabe mizbeach. A child of a treifa can't be brought according to Rabbi Eliezer. Kulahu. So we've got 3 different versions. Kuluk Rabbi Yanai lo Amri. The reason why nobody wanted hold of Rabbi Yanai's answer because Beinikuva sakotz l'drusa says have miyad dia hai mashich v'hai agil. Everybody can tell the difference between a thorn hole and a wolf attack. Wolf attacks have a claw mark, right? Poke a hole in it, that's a coat, that's a thorn. That's a visible difference between those 2 injuries. So they didn't like his answer. Kareish Lakish lo Amri, the reason why nobody liked Reish Lakish's answer is because Amda ena tzricha me'es la'es halcha ena tzricha bedika. Because most people don't agree that once it walks around that it needs to be checked. Once it walks around, it's perfectly fine. And so therefore the fact that it fell is not going to be a treifa issue either. And we could rely on the fact that it was walking around to be acceptable. Rabbi Yirmiyah lo Amri, like Rabbi Yirmiyah, they didn't want to say, is because Rabbi Eliezer lo mukbi. We don't want to hold like Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that the child of a treifa is no good. Right? So therefore, that's why each of them came up with their own separate answer. Kachim min b'mino. So now we're going to have this animal which is kachim of the same type. I've got olos mixed together with other olos. I don't know whose is whose. So what do? The coin brings it and he says, whoever is offering it is, that's whose offering it is. Okay, so, v'hu boi smicha. How are you supposed to do that? The coin, I understand the coin saying, okay, I've got 2 people's offerings here, I mix the 2 of them up. If this is yours, it's yours. If it's his, doesn't make a difference. I bring it to Nola, it's wonderful. Yeah, but somebody's got to smicha on it, right? Somebody's got to lean on the animal. The owner has to lean on it. Well, if you don't know who's the owner, how are they supposed to lean on it? You say, well, both people could do it. No, they can't. Because we said smicha has to be done immediately before the shechita. So if one guy does it and then the other guy does it, the first guy's smicha is no good anymore. I have to do it immediately. So therefore, how am I supposed to do smicha? So the answer is, Amar Rav Yosef. Yosef, the korban noshim. It's a woman's korban, right? Women don't have to do smicha, and that's the solution. This is dealing with women who are bringing korban olah. But when it comes to a man's korban, you're right, we wouldn't be able to solve the problem this way. Let's stop here, because davening is now, and we will continue from Ayin.
Ace Ve'abaye.
Ace Ve'abaye, indeed.